Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio is a labor of love that took 15 years to be completed, and while the movie tells a story that will be familiar to us all, this version is different. Despite that, Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio missed a major thematic triumph, and it's never talked about again. Still, there are many things that this movie does differently that make it a genuinely unique movie, and we'll tell you why Del Toro himself thinks that this is true. Now let's get to it. First up, Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio missed a major thematic triumph. The release of Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio was met with a wave of renewed appreciation for the art of stop-motion filmmaking. This particular version of the classic story was in the making for the last 15 years, and the result is truly magnificent, with the movie giving a fresh take on the old story, sprinkling it with a wartime historical backdrop, peppered with grief, and even more interestingly, an entirely new message of acceptance against conformity. But for all the amazing things that Del Toro's Pinocchio has given us, there is one character who not only stands out amongst all the interesting characters, but whose story ends rather abruptly, never to be heard from again. Which is a real shame, because here they have missed a major thematic triumph that would have benefited from just a small follow-up. We're talking about Candlewick, the son of a fascist officer named Podesta, who hails from the same Italian village as Pinocchio. When we're introduced to him, he seems to be like a small version of his dad, meaning ill-intended and with a bit of a mean streak to him. When their fathers are trying to have a serious talk, Candlewick convinces Pinocchio to set his feet on fire, showing absolutely no remorse for his actions. As the product of his father's strictness and brutality, he is set up as one of the movie's various ambiguous antagonists for all intents and purposes, but as he is shown being bundled up to go to a military camp, he's clearly scared and unsure. It's obvious that he's only doing this to please his father, which is why his arc takes a turn. Following Candlewick's moment of redemption, Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio expands further on this fear of never living up to parental expectations, and it's a recurring theme throughout the movie. Candlewick and Pinocchio are reunited at the military camp, where Pinocchio forgives him instantly, and they quickly become friends, even opening up about one another's hopes and fears. This is when Candlewick reveals he is a constant disappointment to his father, who sees him as weak and a coward, and no matter how hard he tries, Candlewick is always a disappointment compared to Podesta's grandiose fascist vision. Everything eventually comes to a head after Candlewick and Pinocchio go toe-to-toe in a high-stakes game of capture the flag, where the two decide that war is not the only way, and they tie together their flag as a symbol of their peace agreement. This, of course, infuriates Podesta, and as he goes into a sadistic calm rage, he orders his son to shoot Pinocchio point-blank in the head. And then what is possibly the most powerful moment of the entire movie, Candlewick stands up to his father and refuses, in the first act of true bravery of Candlewick in the movie. For a moment, there seems to be a glimmer of remorse on his father's face, but the moment quickly passes as he tries to rally Pinocchio to take up arms. Candlewick shoots his dad with a paint gun, causing him to stumble backwards. When he gets tangled in a net, which is when a bomb falls under the facility, directly on Podesta. A satisfying ending, or is it? It's never talked about again. While it seems to be a good ending to the reign of the semi-villain, releasing those who were tormented by him, but on a closer inspection, this moment has far-reaching consequences, and it's simply never talked about. Pinocchio shows that Candlewick somehow survived the bombing, but after that, his fate is completely unknown. Did he even end up going through with it at all, given the fact that he didn't seem particularly intrinsically motivated? The message that Guillermo Del Toro tries to convey with Candlewick's storyline is that parental authority is not the be-all and end-all, and that conformity and obedience are ultimately the character's undoing. He stands in stark contrast with Pinocchio, following his father's orders blindly and forsaking his own identity to please and conform. Only in a moment of great courage and bravery does he refuse to do so, when he's finally confronted with the utter insanity of his father's commands. Candlewick finally does what he believes to be right, knowing what the consequences will be, and saves Pinocchio. This moment changes everything, including Candlewick. Unfortunately, his reward is the death of his father, but worse still, the death of a seemingly chosen ignorance of this side of the story. Instead, the viewer is left with far too many heartbreaking questions and leaves Candlewick's story feeling somewhat unfinished, don't you think? Hold up, where do you think you're going? We're not through with you yet. Next, some of the things that Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio does differently. Guillermo Del Toro explains what makes his Pinocchio unique, and we'll explain how Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio shows that stop motion is an underrated art form. So stay tuned if you're curious to find out more. First up, some things that Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio does differently. One big missed opportunity aside, Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio overcomes a lot of Disney standards that have resulted in surprisingly captivating, gritty, and even thought-provoking content. This version of the story may share the same name as the classic Disney story. Del Toro did make several changes to create a unique version of the tale, with his own distinctive style to complete the vision. For example, Del Toro's Jiminy Cricket plays the violin and acts as the mentor of Pinocchio, much like Disney's version does. But he's more than for comic relief than anything else. Not that he doesn't try to contribute to the puppet's moral compass, but Death ultimately does a much better job at teaching Pinocchio about the purpose of life than the cricket. Also, Disney movies are generally suitable for all ages, but you might want to reconsider watching this one with the more sensitive youngsters, as the movie doesn't shy away from showing the darker side of the story at all. As such, Del Toro's Geppetto is a little rusty around the edges. He becomes inconsolable when his son Carlo is killed in a bombing, after which he falls from the social ladder and turns to the bottom of the bottle for solace. This is why he's so dissatisfied with Pinocchio, and whereas death is never mentioned in Disney's Pinocchio, in Del Toro's version, death is a dominant theme that is felt throughout the movie, all of which adds up to Del Toro's Pinocchio truly being one of a kind. Next up, Guillermo Del Toro explains what makes his Pinocchio unique. Throughout its history, the story of Pinocchio has found its way into at least 60 adaptations for both TV and film, which of course includes Disney's original animated version that was released back in 1940. Despite that, Guillermo Del Toro was able to make a movie that looks and feels absolutely authentic. In an interview with Variety, the director explained what makes his Pinocchio so unique. The first time Del Toro was impressed with the story was after seeing illustrations of it by Chris Grimley, and they met up in 2003. According to the director, the first screenplay was written about 5 years later. Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio is loosely based on Carlo Collodi's 1881 novel, but the plot isn't followed too closely. While it's much more faithful when it comes to retaining the darkness, humor, and tenderness of its source material than others were able to do. But the biggest change they made from the book was the idea that Pinocchio has to change into a real boy in order to deserve love and acceptance, an idea that Del Toro simply rejected. Del Toro previously drew comparisons between Pinocchio and Dr. Frankenstein's creation in the novel by Mary Shelley, since both creatures are innocents who have been thrown into a world for which no one prepared them. Another aspect of the story that is often overlooked is the fact that Pinocchio changes everyone he comes into contact with. And again, while it would have been nice if we had some kind of follow-up on a certain pivotal character, at least it's yet another aspect that Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio didn't shy away from, and it paid off. And now, how Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio shows that stop motion is an underrated art form. Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio was one of the most eagerly awaited movies of 2022, but the wait has definitely been worth it, as the 15 years that the director put into his labor of love have resulted in what is arguably the best rendition of the story that has ever been created. In order to create this visual delight and masterful feat of engineering, filming took place in 3 different creation studios across the world, from Portland to Mexico and England, giving us a movie that has far surpassed our expectations. It's almost impossible to believe that Pinocchio was Del Toro's first venture into the world of stop-motion animation, because it's an absolute triumph of the art form, taking inspiration from both his relationship with his father and his personal life, as well as his affinity with the othered creatures of society. Del Toro managed to create a story that blends the unbelievable genre of animation with all the subtle epiphanies and nuances of modern-day storytelling. While Del Toro swears that it's no different from setting up a full-size live-action movie set, stop-motion brings something to the story that is simply unachievable with real-life sets and actors. And thanks to Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio, we've all been reminded of that magic that can only be found in this specific genre. Hopefully, it won't be the last time. And that's all we've got for you for now. Do you agree that Candlewick's story was cut a little short in Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio? Or is his side of the story and all the consequences that come with it not important enough to be included in the story? Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more. And thanks for watching.